All right, good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, May 19th, 2022. This is the regular meeting of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Baker? Commissioner Wilson?
Here.
Commissioner Wood?
Here.
Chair Matich?
Here. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to begin with a brief announcement. As you may notice, there are only 4 of us here this morning. After our last meeting, Commissioner Cardenas tendered his resignation from the commission. As you may know, Commissioner Cardenas was actually graciously holding over for a period of time after his term had expired. So I wanted to make that announcement and offer our thanks to Commissioner Cardenas for his service here on the commission and to the state of California in general. He certainly was an excellent example of a commissioner at the Fppc. So thank you very much, Commissioner Cardenas. With that, we will go ahead and proceed to item 1. Is there any public comment for items not on today's agenda?
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Hello. My name is Jeff Ellsworth. I'm the mayor in the town of St. Helena in Napa. I'm calling as an individually elected official, not on behalf of the city or the city council. I called last month as well. I want to just put on record that I've got some concerns here about, I would say, systemic conflict of interest concerns in Napa County that touch into St. Helena as well. I submitted some complaints in the last few months that were returned to me in conversation with staff. Perhaps my comments were a bit nebulous. I'm trying to sort of encompass the systemic issues. I'm going to relook at my comments and resubmit. And, you know, I have great respect for the staff, Fppc staff, but I also just want to make sure that these concerns get to the attention of the board. So once again, you know, right now there's Fppc is looking into one of the county supervisors, and I believe there are other connected systemic concerns. So I'm going to reframe my comments and resubmit, but I just want to, you know, continue putting to the attention of the board, you know, issues in Napa County that touch into St. Helena. Once again, this is Jeff Ellsworth. I'm the mayor here in St. Helena, but speaking as an individually elected official and not on behalf of the city or the council. And I will resubmit and then touch base at next month's meeting.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your public comment, and I would encourage you to continue working with our enforcement staff. That is the appropriate way to convey your concerns to our agency. And just remind you that the commission does sit as a quasi-judicial body in the event that an enforcement matter comes before us. So I would caution you not to speak to us directly about those types of concerns in too great of detail. It may prejudice our ability to consider enforcement action in the future. So, but please do continue working with our enforcement staff.
Thank you, and that's helpful advice. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Do we have any additional public comment for items not on today's agenda? Hearing and seeing none. We're going to take some items out of order, and we're going to move next to item 9, our legislative update with our senior Fppc legislative counsel, Ms. Nakano. I know she has some committee hearings she needs to get to later in the day, so we're going to go ahead and take that up now.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, both near and far. In the legislation report for this month, I've included the regular status updates for all bills, and I've added the Fppc's projected costs for commission-related bills. These figures were calculated with input from all of our divisions at the Fppc. Today, I'll give updates on our priority sponsored bills and on other commission-related bills. And for other commission-related bills, I will also relay the recommendations from the Law and Policy Committee on recommended positions that the Commission may wish to take on those bills. First, I'll give updates on our sponsored bills. As a general note, all of the Commission-sponsored bills that have costs are on the suspense file in the Appropriations Committees. Both committees are meeting today to vote on the suspense file. For AB 2172 by Assemblymember Cervantes, relating to paper filing with the SOS, I had reported in previous meetings that staff was in the process of talking to SOS and gathering information about the limitations of their current electronic filing system and how that could impact the goals of this bill to eliminate paper filing and instead rely solely on the filings on CalAccess. After those conversations and after receiving a lot of information from SOS, we learned that the forms on CalAccess cannot be updated or changed, meaning that in some cases, the forms on CalAccess are not identical to the up-to-date forms that have been approved by the Commission. After analysis from our legal division, we determined that it would not be acceptable for the official filing to be on an out-of-date form. So we are moving forward with amendments that would allow folks to file paper filings instead by email with the SOS using a digital signature. This will still eliminate some of the burden of paper filings and handwritten signatures while ensuring that the official filing for audit and other legal purposes is on the up-to-date form. This also ensures that we retain full and consistent disclosure for all filers. We do have a cost for this bill. It will require one new position in our legal division. The next bill I have updates for is SB 921 by Senator Newman, relating to the Data Act. This is one of the bills that is on suspense in the Appropriations Committee today. Our costs for this one include one-year limited term position to build the technical infrastructure and a second IT position for maintaining the information and records on our website. Next is SB 1483 by Senator Glazier, relating to the Political Reform Education Program. That bill is also on suspense. Our costs for this one include the annual contract amount for the Blackboard education software and 3 new positions. I'll pause here for any questions about Commission-sponsored bills.
Commissioners have any questions for Ms. Nakano? Commissioner Wood?
If you can hear me, sorry. I don't know what it means to be in the suspense file. Can you just explain that?
Oh, yes, of course. So the suspense file, both Appropriations Committees, the Assembly and the Senate, have a file that if the bill is over a certain amount or meets other criteria, like if it, I think if it creates a reporting requirement, there are certain criteria that will require that the bill be held on suspense. And so what that means is that it's held back in the committee until the legislature has a better idea of what the budget is going to look like, in this case, after the May revise. So the legislature can look at all of the bills that have costs over this certain amount and determine which ones they want to put through and which are the priorities in terms of the budget.
Any other questions for Ms. Nakano before she proceeds? Ms. Nakano.
Thank you. I'll move on now to other commission-related bills. I'll go over updates, costs, and recommended positions from the Law and Policy Committee. AB 975 by Assemblymember Rivas was amended on May 5th. This bill relates to electronic filing for statements of economic interests and extending the time that a public official has to make reimbursement for a gift of admission to an invitation-only event. The amendments make 2 substantive changes that expand the bill. The first change is related to a separate subject, namely retention requirements for paper filings filed with filing officers. The amendments allow a filing filed on paper to be immediately retained on microfilm or other space-saving materials or as an electronic copy, instead of the filing officer having to retain the filing first on paper for 2 years. So it allows immediate electronic retention instead of having to keep that on paper. Second, the amendments expands the time extension for returning, donating, or making reimbursement for all gifts, not just gifts gifts of event invitations, to within 30 days after the end of the calendar quarter in which the gift was received. The previous iteration of the bill applied only to gifts of admission to invitation-only events. The amendments expand the bill to all gifts. Under current law, if a gift is returned, donated, or the official pays reimbursement for the gift within 30 days of receipt, the gift might not be considered a gift under the Act and thus would not be reportable. This bill would change that threshold for all gifts to 30 days after the end of the calendar quarter in which the gift was received. The FPPC's costs for this bill are minor. The Law and Policy Committee made the decision to make no recommendation regarding a position at the time, and instead asked me to reach out to the author's office about a possible alternative solution to the gift-related provisions that would require lobbyists to disclose the amount of the gift to the recipient within 15 days of receipt and would give the recipient 45 days after receipt to decide whether to return, donate, or reimburse the lobbyist. I reached out to the author's office and I'm still having those conversations, so the Commission may wish to hold off on taking any position on this bill today. I'll move on to the next bill, AB 1783 by Assemblymember Levine, relating to expanding the definition of administrative action for purposes of determining what is considered lobbying under the Act. At the Assembly Elections Committee hearing, I was able to get more background on this bill, and the author confirmed that this bill did arise from the SAC-V article relating to contingent fees for securing certain kinds of contracts. The bill is narrow and applies to approvals of mergers and acquisitions of certain healthcare service plans and domestic insurers. FPPC's costs for the bill are minor, and the Law and Policy Committee recommended a support position for this bill. The next is AB 1819 by Assemblymember Lee, relating to prohibiting contributions from foreign-influenced business entities. The FPPC has costs for this bill. It will need 3 new positions, 2 in enforcement and 1 in legal. The Law and Policy Committee recommended that the Commission take no position on this bill. Next is AB 2158 by Assemblymember Mike Fong. This bill requires members of the governing boards of school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools to take the local agency ethics training. The FPPC will require 1 new IT position. For some background on why we need a position there, IT staff respond to hundreds of requests for technical assistance every week relating to the online local agency ethics training program, and this bill will add over 2,000 agencies to those that must complete the ethics training. The Law and Policy Committee recommended a support position for this bill. The next bill is AB 2528 by Assemblymember Bigelow. This bill requires local candidates and officers with campaign contributions of $15,000 or more to file their campaign statements electronically with the Secretary of State's office, in addition to with whoever they currently file with, such as their local filing officer. Recent amendments require SOS to submit a report to the legislature after CARS, the Cal Access Replacement System, is certified, detailing what changes need to be made to CARS so that it can accept those local filings. And SOS would be required to consult with the FPPC and the Department of Technology in preparing that report. The duty to file with SOS would not be triggered until after CARS is certified and the necessary changes to the system have been made so that local filings can be accepted. The Commission's costs for this bill are minor, and the Law and Policy Committee recommended support. The next bill is a new bill. SB 746 by Senator Skinner was amended on May 10th to delete the previous contents of the bill and add a new section to the Political Reform Act. The bill relates to situations where a business entity uses its products or services to disseminate a communication with the purpose of influencing an election. The bill would make any compensation paid by a business entity for those purposes a contribution or expenditure under the Act. According to the author's fact sheet, the bill is attempting to address the issue of social media sites using their technology to influence voter behavior, such as by targeting users with favorable or disfavorable information about a particular candidate. Because this bill is so new, staff would recommend taking staff would recommend that the commission wait to see how this bill takes shape before taking any position. SB 1352 by Senator Allen, the next bill, relates to reducing the threshold for campaign reporting during the time period before the 90-day pre-election period in order to have faster reporting of lower amounts during this period. The thresholds were lowered from $5,000 to $2,500, and reporting would be required within 5 days instead of the current 10 days. The commission would require one new position in enforcement, and the Law and Policy Committee decided not to recommend any position at the time. There was some concern about lowering the reporting deadline to 5 days. I reached out to the author's office, and they are considering some possible future amendments, including an amendment that would change the deadline back to 10 days under current law. So at this time, because the Law and Policy Committee has some reservations about the current bill, and it looks like the bill may be amended in the future, the near future, the Commission may wish to hold off on taking any position today. Next is SB 1360 by Senator Umberg. This bill makes several changes to the disclosure requirements for campaign ads and makes changes in the elections code relating to the initiative, referendum, and recall process. The bill was amended on May 11th. The bill reverts back to existing law, some changes relating to font and background color for disclosures. It makes 2 changes to font and text size requirements and makes a minor change to the wording for top funder disclosures. The Commission would require one new position in enforcement, and the Law and Policy Committee decided not to make any recommendation at the time. Staff's recommendation was for a support position for the PRA provisions and no position for the provisions amending the elections code. The committee asked how the position would be notated and communicated to the legislature and the public, since we would only be taking a position on part of the bill. The committee analysis would note the nuance. I spoke with a committee analyst. However, the floor analysis, including those provided only to the members, would not be able to specify that the commission supported only part of the bill. It would just notate support. Formal letters are submitted through an online portal, and part of the submission process includes filling in a bubble for support, oppose, support if amended, or oppose unless amended. And the position on floor analyses are automatically generated based on which bubble is filled in, so that nuance would be lost if we submitted a formal support letter. At the Law and Policy Committee meeting, there was discussion that we wanted to make sure that if the Commission supported the PRA provisions in the bill, that there would be no confusion about the partial position. Given how the position shows up on floor analyses, the Commission may wish to not submit a formal support letter. However, if the Commission still wants to communicate support for the PRA provisions, I could do so through verbal testimony at the next committee hearing with the legislature, and that would not show up on the floor analyses. The last bill is SB 1439 by Senator Glazier. This relates to applying the conflict of interest disqualification provisions to directly elected members of local government agencies who are currently exempt. The Commission will need 3 new positions, 2 in enforcement and 1 in legal, and the Law and Policy Committee recommended support for this bill. And I'll turn to the Commission now if you would like to return to any of those bills and have further discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Nakano. Appreciate that. Do commissioners have questions or comments for Ms. Nakano? Baker?
Thank you again for a great and very thorough report, and for the follow-up items that came out of Law and Policy, particularly on the Ben Allen bill relating to 5 days or 10 days for reporting $2,500 contributions. And on this split, we support part of the Umberg bill, but want to stay neutral on the other part of the bill. For my part, I just wanted to thank you for that follow-up. I'm very hopeful that amendments can be made, certainly to the Ben Allen bill, and I would be encouraging of you to take that step, if the commission agrees, to at most do testimony that we are supportive of a portion of the Umberg bill, and I should probably be more precise, 1360, SB 1360, just in live testimony to make so that it's very clear. And I understand that doesn't then transmit into floor reports or otherwise where it becomes blurry. So I want to thank you for that and encourage that. I'll be ready to make a motion for support of particular bills that came out of law and policy, but I don't want to rush my colleagues if they have questions on other bills.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Other commissioners have questions or comments for Ms. Nakano on the legislative report? Commissioner Wood?
I don't know if this is for Ms. Nakano or for you guys on the policy committee, but I'd love to hear more about our neutral position on the foreign contribution bill 1819.
Speaking for myself, I have some level of concern that there may be constitutional issues with the way the bill is crafted, and I'm reluctant to support it without some greater assurance that the approach that's currently be taken would pass constitutional muster. That's my own feeling on it. Commissioner Baker, I don't know if you had a different perspective on that.
I certainly shared those concerns as well, and then also concerns about implementation and how feasible it is as a business is going to be able to fit within the definition of what's foreign influence, what isn't, and the reporting requirements. And I certainly want to continue watching this and seeing how it evolves. I'm mindful that we've previously supported a bill, I believe it's by Assemblymember Valladares. It could have been last year. It could have been this year. My time frame is a little off on trying to shore up and reaffirm our support for prohibiting foreign contributions to campaigns in California because there's some blur at the federal level. And I thought that was a good move for us. I don't know that we still need to do this particular provision. We'll see how the bill goes.
Thank you. I haven't read it, so I just appreciate the head start.
Thanks, Commissioner Wood. Any other questions for Ms. Nakano from the commission?
I don't have questions, but if it's not stepping on any other further questions, I would move to recommend the commission have a support position on the 4 bills that Law and Policy recommended to support, and that's AB 1783, Mr. Levine on lobbying and administrative actions. That's on page 5 of Ms. Nakano's memo report. AB 2158 regarding trainings, local agency ethic trainings. AB 2528, Mr. Bigelow's legislation related to Cal Access and local candidates and elections officers. And then SB 1439, the last one that Ms. Nakano reported on, and that's Mr. Glazier's bill regarding contributions to local government agencies. That would be my motion.
Commissioner Baker, would you be willing to entertain a friendly amendment to include as well a support position, although verbally, on SB 1360 as well?
Find 13.
That's the one that's split between the PRA and the Elections Code.
I would entertain a motion, a friendly one that is just for Ms. Nakano to provide oral testimony. That is the best way to make it clear that we only support that provision. But I would be less, as she was mentioning, if that's your intent, I'm very supportive of that friendly amendment.
Yes, that is exactly. It would be a verbal testimony by Ms. Nakano on clear SB 1360, expressing our support for the PRA related portions of that bill and no position on the Elections Code.
Agreed. I would accept that amendment if it's been made.
Commissioner Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't know if this would be a friendly amendment, but for clarification, I would be in support of the motion, providing the bills are not substantially amended throughout the process. With a couple of those measures on the suspense file, it's likely that if they get off the suspense file, substantive amendments might be incorporated into the bill before it's reported, to the floor. So I would say that I would support the motion, providing there aren't any substantial or substantive amendments that would amend the bill in a manner that's inconsistent with what we're discussing today.
I agree with that. I think Ms. Nakano would, I think as a matter of internal policy, she would do that for us, but I think it's something we absolutely should clarify part of this motion. So assuming Commissioner Baker, it's your motion.
I don't know, Ms. Commissioner Wilson can help me get this phrased just right, but I would accept both of those friendly amendments to include the recommendation that 1360 PRA oral testimony be provided by Ms. Nakano in support, but not the other, will remain neutral, and that any substantive, and I would even say any substantive, whether they're against where we'd want to go or not, just be reported back to us, and that our support's contingent on that. Is that right, Mr. Wilson?
Eloquently stated by Commissioner Baker, so that sums it up.
How eloquent that was. It's hard to do friendly amendments eloquently.
All right, so we have a motion with 2 friendly amendments. I will second the motion with both friendly amendments. Do we have any public comment before we call the vote on this? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Lincoln.
Commissioner Baker,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Matich.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Excellent. Anything further, Ms. Nakano?
Nothing today. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we'll move then to item 2, approval of the April 2022 Commission minutes. Do any commissioners have edits or comments on our meeting minutes? Hearing and seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Move the adoption of the minutes.
Second.
Second. The comment? Hearing and seeing none, Ms. Linker.
Commissioner Baker,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Matich.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you. I will proceed then to our consent calendar, which today consists of 2 items, items 3 and items 4. As Chief Brereton is coming to the table, I would just let everybody know, Chief Brereton let me know yesterday that I believe she is going to remove item 4 from today's consent calendar. If she's settled in, she can elaborate on that for us.
Morning, Chair and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Yes, that is correct. I would like to remove item number 4 from the agenda. We have been in contact frequently with the respondents, and we believe that things are moving in the right direction concerning compliance, and we'd like to have some more time to make that happen.
Well, for my part, I think that is a great development. I appreciate your staff's willingness to continue working with Mr. Fangari to come into compliance and solve the matter without going to default. Item 3.
Yes. So we are recommending a stipulation with a maximum fine for 3 violations. As you'll note in the stipulation, these violations do not qualify for the streamlined program, although all of these types of violations would typically qualify for streamlined. But because the public harm here is more than minimal, that is one reason it doesn't qualify. We also found during our investigation an intent to violate the act concerning the occupation and employer information. There was also inaccurate reporting given that gave an inflated idea of how much support the committee had. Cash was used, which interfered with our ability to verify the source of the loan. The story regarding the loan was, it also lacked credibility, although we couldn't verify or deny it. It certainly seemed suspect to us. And overall, there was untimely and inaccurate disclosure before the election for this committee. The candidate also was successful and has been in office since that time. So taking all of those things into consideration, this case did not qualify for the streamlined program. However, there was also mitigation involved in this case. The candidate was inexperienced with the act. The treasurer as well was inexperienced. The treasurer was also a minor, which lends another layer of interest to this story. The respondents have no prior history of violations of the act. They cooperated fully with our investigation. Eventually, amendments were filed to give the accurate picture according to the records that were available through the bank account. They also agreed to a tolling agreement so that we could bring this matter fully before you. So in light of all of the mitigation, we crafted and negotiated this settlement to combine violations into one count, because occupation employer information is typically not, we don't typically charge per person contributor whose occupation employer is not included. So we followed that same guidance here, even though there was aggravating circumstances. But we are asking for the maximum fine, which typically we don't for that kind of violation. We also charged the most egregious of the other violations, the most egregious, which involve the misreporting of the loan and the cash used for that loan. The other violations we are using as aggravation for those, and again, we're asking for the maximum penalty for all violations that we're bringing here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Chief Brereton. I do actually have a question. It's on the law, though, and that is, you mentioned that the treasurer that this individual decided to use was a minor. Is that permissible under the Act?
The Act is silent on whether actors under the Act need to be of age, but we did not feel it was reasonable under the circumstances to bring an action against a minor. We haven't, as far as I'm aware, Galena may recall too, I'm not aware of having this situation come up before, where we've had a minor who was possibly liable under the Act. So that was our feeling under these circumstances, that it just wasn't the right thing to do. Okay. And certainly I'm not disagreeing with your approach. It was more, it prompted the inquiry in my own mind. Yes, Commissioner Wilson.
Yes. I have a related question, and the chair covered at the issue that I was going to raise. In my opinion, clearly the minor should not be held liable, but there should be some way of ensuring that a minor is not a treasurer for a campaign committee. I mean, it's almost laughable, but it's a very serious matter, and I know we can't address that today, but I can't imagine a scenario where if we have to do it by regulation or even through legislation, that issue should be addressed. I mean, it's reprehensible, in my opinion, for obvious reasons. There's a whole list of things minors cannot do. And for a minor to say, oh, by the way, I can't do the following, I can't drink, et cetera, but I can be the treasurer of a campaign committee that manages hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, that is ridiculous. And I think at some point we should address that issue.
Share your concern, Commissioner Wilson, and I think when we get to item 11, future agenda. But sticking with item 3, do other commissioners have questions for Chief Brereton on item 3?
If I may, Mr. Chair, I completely agree with the point about minors, and if we need to do it by regulation or legislation, I will look forward to whatever is going to be the recommendation and are pursuing that in the coming year. With respect to the minor, do we have a policy of whether we name a minor in a stipulation? We use the minor's name here. And I know this isn't a criminal matter, and I know this isn't something that we've had come up before, but that's my first question. And the second is to follow up on your why this would, in other situations, had you not used what I think is very appropriate, and I'm grateful for, discretion, this could have been something that otherwise would have qualified for streamlining. So those, I guess, are my two questions.
Certainly. So the first, the treasurer was named in the campaign filings, the 410 and the 460s. So the information is publicly available already. I think if in the future, hopefully this situation won't come up again, but if it were a situation where a minor were involved, but the information wasn't publicly available elsewhere, we may consider not including that person's name because he or she is a minor. Regarding your second question, the factor for whether the public harm is more than minimal is an exclusion from the streamlined program. It does require us to evaluate the evidence that's available and evaluate all of the facts and circumstances, but it's different than the chief discretion factors that are allowed in the regulations. The discretion factors really say, in general, that the chief can choose to include or not include, even if there is an exclusion. But here, this is an exclusion that is available that says if the public harm is more than minimal, it does not qualify for streamline. And our evaluation of the evidence and the facts and the circumstances was that it was more than minimal.
Yeah, I certainly agree, and I appreciate again that the discretion was very appropriately used. I think in your earlier part of your presentation, you mentioned that the types of violations typically would have at least made this a candidate for streamlining. And I was just curious if there were other components that would have. It's helpful as we're seeing how we're catching those cases that would otherwise fall into streamline, how we catch them and why. So I don't need further elaboration. I'm grateful again for the discretion that was used. And I certainly would consider in the future, if hopefully you'll never see this again, and hopefully we'll have either a regulation or a statute that says there won't be minors as treasurers, but if it happens again, may consider, even though the filing reports are in, have the name, a legal document that looks like a legal settlement might exclude their name. Appreciate that.
Commissioner Baker. Any other questions or comments for Chief Brereton on item 3? Hearing and seeing none, I would make a motion to approve the stipulation. I agree with my colleagues. I think you absolutely were correct in exercising your discretion to pull this one out of streamline. And the penalty amounts, I think, also reflect the appropriate level of harm, or the appropriate response considering the level of harm perpetrated here. That's my motion. So I have a second.
Second that motion.
Public comment on item 3. Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Linkert?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wood?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right. Thank you, Chief Brereton. Great job.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our general items, beginning with item 5. This is our pre-notice discussion of proposed regulatory changes specifying the duties of filing officers and requirements for referrals. And with us today is Commission Counsel, Mr. Torrin Lewis. We'll give him a second here to get settled in.
So, good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Torrin Lewis with the Legal Division. As mentioned, I'm going to be discussing item number 5, And this is pre-notice discussion of some regulatory changes concerning the duties of filing officers, as well as requirements for referrals to the Commission. And specifically, staff is proposing some amendments to Regulations 18115, and that's a regulation concerning the duties of filing officers with respect to statements of economic interest, as well as proposed amendments to Regulation 18360. And I should clarify, these are both existing regulations. And 18360 concerns the requirements for referrals to the Commission's Enforcement Division. So at present, filing officers defined under the Act as the office or officer with whom any statements or reports are required to be filed under the Act, play an important role in helping ensure the efficient and effective administration of the Act. And one way that they do this is to submit referrals to the Commission. And the way this is usually done is through completing the electronic complaint form via the Commission's public website. This form prompts filing officers to enter certain required information, and this includes whether the referred entity is an individual, a committee, a candidate, and in addition to these required forms, the referring filing officer has the option of uploading documents to the electronic complaint system. As a practical matter, as I understand it, the Enforcement Division's practice is to reject referrals if they do not include certain documents. And these include 2 written notifications from the filing officer that have been sent in an effort to get compliance, a copy of the most recently filed relevant form, whether that's an SEI or a campaign statement, if applicable, and specifically in the case of SEI referrals, a copy of their agency's, the filer's agency's conflict of interest code. So again, it's my understanding that it is current enforcement practice to reject a referral if it does not include those documents. These practices and the electronic complaint system as it currently exists notwithstanding, the Enforcement Division has brought to our attention some issues commonly encountered with referrals. And for context, the Enforcement Division intake staff receives around 100 referrals per month on average. And they've observed a pattern of referrals containing insufficient, unclear, outdated, or incorrect information, and that in turn takes up valuable staff time and resources tracking down the referred filer or that information. And so staff has identified that some of these issues simply stem from a lack of clarity as to what information filing officers should provide and what steps they should take to cure deficient referrals. And so to that end, we're proposing a number of amendments, again, the first of which would be to existing Regulation 18115, specifically subsections A3 and A4. And these amendments would require filing officers to send at least one notice to the filer's personal email or personal mailing address, and to obtain updated contact information, including personal email address or mailing address and telephone number. Similarly, we propose amending subparagraph B3D to include that a filing official notify the filing officer when the filer's lack of filing has been due to a leave of absence, and to clarify when the filer is expected to return back to work. Second, The staff recommends amending Regulation 18360. Again, this is the existing regulation concerning requirements for referrals. Now, specifically subsection A3 and subparagraph C, to require filing officers to include, as part of the information they provide to the Commission regarding attempts to obtain compliance, the email address, mailing address, and phone number at which the referred filer was contacted, or they attempted to contact them. And we're also recommending adding two new subparagraphs D and E to this regulation to specify what information in particular must be included in a referral to the Enforcement Division. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the particulars of these requirements, and I should also note that I defer to Enforcement Chief Brereton and Tara Stock in terms of any specific questions around the enforcement intake process as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Appreciate the presentation. Excellent job on the memo. I did have a question, though. We, this morning, received a comment letter from the County of Los Angeles, and it is requesting what seem to be some minor amendments to the proposed regulation, but I was wondering if you had any reaction or thoughts on their proposed.
Yeah, I think our initial thoughts are that we certainly understand their concerns, and that's something we're happy to look into, and if they'd like, work with them further to take a look at that issue.
Do other commissioners have questions or comments for Mr. Lewis? Mr. Baker?
Thank you for this presentation. It seems like something, ideally we shouldn't have to do. I know we do trainings, but if we can provide the information, it saves our team time so that we can be faster, better, stronger. Terrific. Question I had is, has the team identified any patterns in the either the type of filing officers, the types of positions, geography for where the clarity, for where the shortcomings are happening? I'm not looking to name names, but are there any other patterns that you've been able to identify? And I ask less because, well, first we want the regulations to address them, and I think the way these are preliminarily written, I think that's quite possible, but also if there are any implications to what our training and outreach might be going forward.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Commissioner. I think, again, this is an area we'll defer to Chief Brereton and her team.
We have Ms. Stock from the Enforcement Division, virtually or on the telephone. Ms. Stock, are you available to respond to that question from Commissioner Baker?
Sure, yes. So, there are several issues that we have become aware of. I think one of the main issues is in the larger agencies, such as these large counties who have, boards, commissions, different divisions. There are liaisons that don't always pass on the information to the main filing officer. And what we have found is that the filing officer doesn't actually confirm either with the board or commission or division whether or not that person is still in office. They just assume that if they haven't been notified otherwise, that they go ahead and make the referral, say, for an annual statement of economic interest. And then a lot of times intake gets the referral, and we can go on to the board or commission's website and see that that person is no longer in that position. So then we, in essence, have to act as the filing officer and start notifying that person, hey, we see that you left office, you need to file your leaving office statement. So it just seems like there's only 5 of us on the intake team, and we get referrals from all over California. So we just prefer that the filing officer, do their due diligence before the referrals are made, to make sure that person is actually still in the position, because we have found some that have left 4 or 5 years ago, and we're still getting these referrals. So that's what, and I wanted to also clarify, as far as rejecting referrals, at this point, we don't just ever automatically reject a referral. We reach out to the filing officer. We try to obtain additional information if it's not included with the referral. So we will reach out and say, hey, we only got one notification. Did you send more than that? And get copies, or same thing with the conflict of interest code and things like that. So we only will reject if we can't get that information from the filing officer. If we've tried and we haven't received a response, eventually we'll reject it, but we don't automatically reject any referrals at all. We try to get the information first. So I don't know if that helps. Did that answer your question at all?
It does. Very helpful. Certainly the latter part, I did come up in my ears like, wow, we really don't automatically reject if there aren't two. I imagine that's discretion. I'm sure that's the case. For the first part, I can certainly understand in real world scenario, large counties, large agencies with multiple filers, they may, I don't want to assume they may be passing it up to us, which is like, you know what, I don't even know if these people are still in office, but I'm just going to move it up, let somebody else do the investigation. And so my hope is that the way we're writing these will really not only discourage it, but make it easy for them to not feel like they have to do that. I don't know that that's all the case, but I can see that being a part of it, human nature sometimes. And the other is if there's anything we can do in our training to either in the outreach that we do to these large counties or the individuals to try to instill that rigor and make it easy for them to do, I would encourage. I don't have specific recommendations on the training, but I don't want us to forget that component. I know we offer it. It's great. I've watched the trainings. It'd just be nice if we could, if that could help too. So thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing hopefully some progress after these changes.
Thank you.
Ms. Stock, I actually had a question for you based on something that you just mentioned. And I know from Mr. Lewis's memo, it sounds like you get, around 100 of these referrals. And you mentioned, it's just you and a couple colleagues handling all these. What percentage, roughly speaking, of referrals are deficient in some way, for lack of a better term, that don't have the information that we would require to efficiently pursue and investigate a referral?
So as far as the notifications and the most recently filed statement, those typically, I would say, probably 75% include that information. I think the main issue that we deal with is receiving annual referrals when the person has actually left office. So the only information we have is their email address for the agency of which they have left. So they were actually never notified because they don't have access to that email address any longer. And then also just a leaving office referral, but we realized that all of the notifications were sent to that person at their agency email address after they left the position. So then we are the ones that have to, figure out, we do have, the investigators that can do a skip trace, but again, then it's like we are acting as a filing officer. And a lot of times it's very simple. Before we even ask for a skip trace, we just, Google the person and you can find their LinkedIn or whatever and find out where they're working now. So we do all of that, but I just feel like some of that responsibility should be on the filing officer before they make the referral, so that we don't end up having to do all of the research for the referrals.
Right. And again, I mean, you're accepting these referrals from all around the state, so it's not an insignificant amount of work coming into our agency. So I appreciate that. Do other commissioners have questions or comments, either for Mr. Lewis or for Ms. Stock? And seeing none, do we have any public comment on this item?
Hello, this is Don Garcia from LA County. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Hi, Mr. Lewis, Mr. Chairman Molly. Yeah, I submitted that letter this morning. Unfortunately, I was just able to get it released from my office to get sent to you this morning. I apologize for that. I was trying to get it there sooner. In Los Angeles County, my division serves as the filing officer for the county, as the This is a code reviewing body. And there's over 411 public agencies, and we collect about 11,000. We have about 11,000 filers utilizing our system. And for us, as I was hearing, we do all that due diligence. We do use liaisons to try to collect the forms because again we have joint powers authorities, charter schools, water districts, all of it. Okay, and the filers coming to us are a subset from those agencies. And lots of times we cannot obtain, the personal email address and the personal address. Again, we do the Google searches like your enforcement people were saying. We do all of that, okay? And sometimes we end up with no, we can't get the address because again, say it's a person, a filer who sits on a joint powers authority and it comes from an individual city and they've left the city. And the city clerk doesn't want to give us a forwarding address, or they don't have a forwarding address. And yes, the person is deficient in filing both an annual and a leaving office statement sometimes, and we can't obtain that information. Okay? And I like to point out too that the filer at this point is not required to submit their personal information when they file a Form 700. It's actually within the verification part of that of the form. It states that it's better to try to use the business or agency address. Lots of times we're using those addresses and utilizing our electronic Form 700 system to make a filing. They use an email address that's associated with their agency. So sometimes we cannot get that personal information. So we're asking on the amendments again that if the phrase "if available" be used. I would hate for it to hamper our ability to send referrals, especially for someone who's trying to dodge a filing and they had a position, they've left the city, and no one has how they can be reached. We can't do a skip trace on our side to try to figure out how where that person is. We've done all the due diligence. We've reached out to our liaisons. We reached out to the cities. We've done the Google searches, and no, we end up with this is the information we have. So we supply all of that, and I'm sure your enforcement side would say the ones coming from Los Angeles County, we do an abundance of notifications to them, trying to reach them. But we don't want it to stop there if we can't get a personal email address or a personal home address. We want to still be able to make the referral. And I'm happy to explain in more detail how our process works. But again, we are, not we're trying to make sure that referrals do not get hampered in us getting able to send them up to you.
Thank you. I appreciate you calling and elaborating further on your comment letter. I actually do have a question about your procedures. So when an official is leaving office, because I think I heard from Ms. Stock that perhaps the largest percentage of the deficient referrals involve the leaving office annual. When somebody is about to leave office, do you ask them to voluntarily provide a forwarding address, email or otherwise?
Well, it depends on which filers we're talking about. If there's a direct relationship, or if there's a direct relationship within that come from our own internal agency, yes, we're trying to reach them in advance. But a lot of times, a person might be leaving a city, and then again, they subsequently have sat on a joint powers authority or some other body, and then the city informs them that that person left already. So when they're trying to get back to that thing, they do not know in advance that the person has already left. Okay? And at times, yes, the commissioner or the person sitting who's on the agency will say, "I'm going to leave," and we suggest strongly to our filing officers or our liaisons or filing officials to try to obtain personal information. And again, we do that for a substantial amount of them, and it's the ones that we can't get that are the issue.
I appreciate that. That's helpful information. Thanks. Any other public comment on item 5? Any further commissioner comments?
I just have one, Mr. Chair, and I will just say that I'm just going to be thinking about this based on the helpful public comment happening and what our team is experiencing. If in addition, we may need to consider a regulation that requires filing officers to get forwarding information. and add that additional requirement. That would be putting taking this a step further and just saying, look, you're going to have to ask, and it's something that you have to obtain. I don't know that we're there yet. I don't think that's what this does necessarily. I think certainly the proposal that's coming from the public comment to make it if it's available. But I want to throw that out there as something we may look at. And I'm not sure if our team considered how much more to expand the reach of requiring them to do that. It may be outside of our jurisdiction.
That last part may be the hiccup there. All right, thank you, Commissioner Baker. Mr. Lewis, it seems to me that this is pre-notice. And so between now and the time that this is scheduled to come back for adoption, staff should reach out to, obviously, Mr. Garcia from LA County, but other continued reach out, because I know you did some of that during this process. But I would encourage you to continue reaching out to them and try and sort through some of these issues, because I think all parties are trying to do the right thing and agree what the problem is. It's just what's the best route to solve that problem. So otherwise, Commissioner Wilson.
Yes, and in addition to the comments made by Commissioner Baker and the chair, I also think it would be helpful to reach out to other large counties like San Francisco, where they have thousands of public employees. Because the public comments made by LA County, I think, are significant. If you had a situation where somebody, let's say, was terminated, and they're not going to give you their email address, or we'll just say inadvertently give you the wrong personal email address. And so, I think we ought to seriously look at the technical amendment that would say if feasible or if available. But I would defer to Mr. Lewis in terms of giving us some recommendations that would make the most sense. And thank you very much for your detailed presentation.
Certainly happy to do that.
All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I appreciate it. We'll see you in 2 months. All right, we'll now proceed to item number 6. This is our regulation regarding cryptocurrency. This is an item that I asked staff to look into earlier this year and come back to us with their thoughts on. Back in 2018, which doesn't seem that long ago, but actually when you're involving technology, a lot changes in a short amount of time. I think we have seen an increased interest in cryptocurrency since 2018, which includes folks who want to express themselves to candidates, to ballot measures, et cetera, using that type of vehicle currency, if you can call it that. And so, consistent with our overarching goals of continuing to examine ways to modernize the Act to keep pace with evolving campaign activity, I felt strongly that now was a good time to have staff come back and report on this issue. As we do that, personally, my view on this is that we need to focus on an approach that doesn't necessarily try to pigeonhole cryptocurrency in existing regimes of either cash or an investment. It is its own thing. The question for us, I think, and the principal discussion for us is what regulatory approach can we pursue which honors the First Amendment expressive activity that some folks wish to undertake, and at the same time also continues to uphold the integrity of our campaign finance laws, particularly with regard to sources of a contribution and identity of contributors and our contribution limits. That's sort of my long way of introducing why it is that we're talking about cryptocurrency today. So at this point, I will turn it over to Senior Fppc Counsel Zachary Norton.
Good morning, Chair Matich and Commissioners. So when the Commission last addressed cryptocurrency in 2018, it voted to prohibit the making and receipt of cryptocurrency contributions with the adoption of the existing regulation. We now present for pre-notice discussion options for the Commission to reconsider its position on cryptocurrency. And these options are conceptual at this time. So what we're presenting for options 2 and 3 are just sort of the basic structures of how these might look, and we're certainly looking for suggestions from the commission as to how to tailor these should they choose to move forward. Option 1 would be to maintain the existing prohibition. Option 2 would be to treat cryptocurrency contributions as cash contributions. And this is partly because it's not quite clear what cryptocurrency is. When the act was drafted, this was not something that was contemplated. So we think that it is analogous to cash, and it's sort of based on the Federal Elections Commission's approach. They ruled that Bitcoins are money or anything of value. The FPC does allow Bitcoin contributions in the same manner as cash. There it is at the $100 level. And the FPC prohibits expenditures in cryptocurrency by committees. In that sense, option 2 is relatively similar to the existing option at the federal level. Option 3 would be to permit cryptocurrency contributions as in-kind contributions, but require the use of a payment processor. And the payment processor requirement would be to help to ensure proper and truthful disclosure, because the payment processor would, in a sense, act as a check, as a third-party intermediary to implement verification measures to establish that the payment is actually coming from the contributor. We think that's consistent with the Act's prohibition on cash contributions of $100 or more. The requirement that contributions be in the form of a written instrument from the contributor. So, tracing. So in adopting the current regulation, the Commission had concerns about the traceability of cryptocurrency and how, as a result, it could be used to circumvent contribution limits and prohibitions or by foreign entities seeking to contribute to campaigns. And as noted in the memo, other jurisdictions have also prohibited it, while some have allowed it as an in-kind contribution. The nature of cryptocurrency itself presents challenges for ensuring full and truthful disclosure of campaign contributions. And while anyone can conduct rudimentary tracing of cryptocurrency using a standard blockchain explorer, these tools aren't suitable for tracing suspicious activity because they don't provide the real-world identity of the users. So, blockchain. Cryptocurrencies run on a decentralized distributed public ledger called blockchain, which is a record of all transactions ever made. And it stores the data in blocks that are then chained or linked together in chronological order. And different cryptocurrencies utilize different blockchains. The public ledger is basically an enormous spreadsheet with no single controlling entity or person, and is decentralized, so all users maintain a copy of the ledger. And it's not unlike the basic concept behind recording of deeds, where the land seller and buyer come together at closing to verify that there is a title that's actually being transferred, there's witnesses to the transaction, and then that transaction is documented at the county level. However, unlike deeds, the blockchain doesn't identify the true identity of the owner. This brings us to know your customer requirements, which is what we are proposing should the Commission choose to go with option 3. Federal regulators have classified cryptocurrency exchanges as money service businesses, which makes them subject to know your customer and anti-money laundering rules. And the purpose of these rules is to help reduce fraud by ensuring that the businesses collect and verify data about their customers. Traditional financial institutions use these measures when a new client opens up an account. They would include a request for identification, such as a driver's license, social security number, or other documents, which are then verified, and then that data is stored to ensure compliance. So now that cryptocurrency exchanges are subject to the same rules as their traditional financial counterparts, and if fully implemented, these protocols are designed to identify the customer. However, it's not clear that the enforcement requirements are being enforced as stringently by exchanges as with banks. And some exchanges have actually opted to cease doing business with U.S.-based customers altogether, as opposed to implement even the most rudimentary of Know Your Customer protocol. Also, some require an uploaded copy of an ID and a photograph, while others will allow users to begin trading immediately and then are only stopped if the Know Your Customer check reveals something suspicious. And there's other exchanges that allow users to open up accounts without any check at all, but then limit transactions, such as prohibiting downloads until that Know Your Customer requirement has been complied with. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. By the way, let me just say, I think your memo that you crafted for us was very well researched, easy to follow. I know sometimes it's hard when we're talking about technology to convey it to folks that aren't, well, like me, that aren't necessarily technologically savvy. But I thought you did a very good job. It was very understandable. Thank you. Easy to read. Appreciate that. I had a question about the approach currently taken by the FEC, which is similar to option number 2 that you presented here, where dollars, essentially, I think you said, treat it like cash. As I understand it, under the FEC rules, a committee could receive up to $100 directly into, is that right?
Yes.
And at that point, the committee could park it in that wallet, and a year later, 6 months later, whatever, cryptocurrency has exploded, and now that $100 cryptocurrency is worth $30,000. My understanding of the FEC rules is the committee could then cash that cryptocurrency out and realize the total gain on that initial $100 contribution. None of that would be subject to the contribution limits. None of that would be attributable back to the original contributor. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Well, see, I raise that hypothetical because that is why I think of the approaches that you have laid out, option 3 seems to me to do the best job of preventing circumvention of the contribution limits while also adhering to the goal of ensuring that we know who the contributor is, folks that shouldn't be contributing in our election. So I just wanted to make sure I understood the FEC approach correctly and the consequences of that approach. I think option 3. Well, let me just ask, Commissioner Wood, I know, as we all can see or hear, your voice is coming in and out, and I know you had a few questions that you had asked me to communicate to Mr. Norton today. If you want, I'm happy to do that, but I wanted to check in and see if you thought you could.
I'll try, and if you're not hearing me, then the chair has my question, which is on, is it too bad already? Should I just let you read it?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. On the third option, it seems to me like we'll want to tighten up, or we'll kind of have tight language around what a third-party payment processor should kind of look like. Because it seems to me that there could be some kind of slimy ones out there. And so we wouldn't want to leave it completely open. We would instead want to make sure that they're subject to certain regulations or they have certain security requirements or whatever. They're located maybe in the United States. I don't know. Can you talk about different options that you all have considered in your work? And by the way, I really appreciated your memo. I had a couple of seminar students write on this year, and the combination of all 3 has been really informative for me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that is something that we have considered very carefully while working on this, is that we would want to introduce, if we went with option 3 requiring the use of a payment processor, we would want to introduce certain parameters and requirements. Being located in the United States, that's a great suggestion. And I think we have taken that into consideration as well, that there might be other operators that are not above board that might decide, oh, well, if it's now permissible in California, let's segue into this business. So we would want to make sure that there are stringent requirements that Know Your Customer protocol is not only required but rigorously enforced, and that information is collected before any activity can take place. So we would be careful in drafting that. And we'd want to make sure that those parameters aren't so specific that it rules out practical application. Because this is evolving rapidly. I think when this meeting began, there were 19,502 cryptocurrencies. As of when I sat down, there were 2 more being actively traded. So to say that this is changing quickly is probably an understatement.
Commissioner Wood, did you have additional questions or comments?
I mean, this is not really our jurisdiction, but I'm just wondering, have you thought about what it means for the climate to do this? I mean, my understanding kind of vaguely is that all this cryptocurrency stuff is basically requiring so much energy that it's taking up a lot of our renewable resource or our renewable energy production and things like that. So I mean, it's not a reason to not allow it, but it is something to kind of at least discuss a little bit. And I don't know if it came up at all in your work so far.
I didn't include that in the memo, but I did read articles discussing that it does take a tremendous amount of computing power and therefore a tremendous amount of energy to basically engage in cryptocurrency mining, as well as the blockchain verification process, that involves mining. It involves using computers to solve very complex algorithms. And that has become a huge concern.
Thank you, Commissioner Wood. Commissioner Baker?
Thank you. And I just want to go off the freeway briefly. Commissioner Wood, I hope you feel better soon. I hope you've got your great voice back soon, and appreciate you hanging in there with us and toughing it out. So thank you also, Mr. Norton, for an excellent memo. As you've often potentially heard from me, I'm one of the commissioners who needs a visual. I'm a visual thinker. If you can draw a diagram on a page, I can get it. And you did a very good job of providing analogies, like it's like a bank account. It's like your PIN number. And so I appreciate that. Couple questions. Can you say more about how our current rules in California treat the situation where a donor provides stock to a campaign? Is that allowed? And how do we treat that? Because crypto does have an element of cash. It has an element of in-kind to it. And it has an element of a stock asset that is appreciating. And I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about what our rules are if we were looking at this more like contributing something like a stock.
Yes, and under existing rules, a contribution of stock is allowed. That would be considered an in-kind contribution. A stock would be anything of value. And it would be, the stock itself would be valued based on its market value at the time that contribution is made. And thereafter, the committee, if the committee were to sell it and realize a gain selling it on the stock market, that would basically be reported as a miscellaneous increase to cash. But the gain over the value at the time the contribution was reported would not be attributable itself to the contributor who provided that stock initially.
Okay. The person who gave the stock initially would have been initially disclosed, I assume, because assuming it's over, well, yeah, I mean, they would have been disclosed. That's correct, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And so
we
assume,
and to the point that the chair raised about the FEC, which I thought was an excellent one, and what that option looks like, where if there is that appreciation under the FEC's approach, you're going well over the contribution limit. How do we deal with that currently when we deal with stock? Because it sounds to me like there's a similar situation, but with the stock scenario, maybe we're not, I'm not saying that sure we aren't as concerned, but we're not doing anything about that.
Yeah, I would say that's a similar situation, that because the contribution itself is valued at the time the contribution is made, and then any gain realized over and above that amount is the miscellaneous increase to cash. it wouldn't create a contribution limit issue. I think the issue is probably, in part, the contribution of stocks isn't overly common. I would say that from just my experience in both legal and enforcement, in-kind contributions tend to be more practical things, such as the use of office space for a campaign headquarters or print work done by a printer. It's possible that it could be a valuable painting, but contributions are hard to liquidate and deal with, and what does the committee really want with a valuable painting? It has to find something to do with it. So you do see stocks occasionally, but if it's $500 in stock, it sells for $1,000. $500 is attributable to the contributor. The $1,000 is attributable as miscellaneous increase to cash. And I think the stock market isn't quite as volatile as the crypto market. Recently in the news, there were been quite a few articles about a cryptocurrency called Luna, one of the largest crypto exchanges in the world. Binance invested heavily in Luna. As of 2 weeks ago, they had a $1.6 billion investment that today is worth less than $3,000. So that's on the downside, but there's also the chance that some of these cryptocurrencies really skyrocket in value. So that being said, there is that risk of extreme volatility that a relatively small contribution in cryptocurrency one day, if it were allowed to be retained, could skyrocket in value by the next week.
Yeah, and so that goes to a question as well. So in the stock market, I'm oversimplifying here, but let's say somebody gives a campaign share of stock, and if you tweet about or you do something and you're prominent enough to affect the stock price the next day, you've just really helped that campaign, potentially. I mean, you could have ruined the investment, but let's say you have some role to play, or maybe you have insider information. There are rules about that already, where if you're gaming the system a bit, which is giving stock to someone that you think or know or are going to be able to control in some way, is going to massively increase within a period of time and greatly benefit that campaign. We don't have that ability, I think, with crypto, because it's so much more volatile. And maybe there aren't the insider trading rules and other protections that are in place. Can you say anything about that, like how they're dissimilar in that respect?
I think that's a very good point. They are, I think, dissimilar in that sense that we don't have those same regulations for crypto. And there are several cases. I know there was one, I can't recall the name of the specific cryptocurrency because this was a couple of years ago. It was created by someone who did it mostly as a proof of concept. And the creator was actually surprised that this cryptocurrency took off, people began using it and actually had value. And from what I've read, it sounds like Elon Musk had similar thoughts towards Dogecoin. It was done as maybe for fun, and it sort of took off. And Elon Musk, I'm not saying that he would choose to do anything to manipulate, but someone in that position could, as you have suggested, make a contribution one day and then use Twitter or some other social media to kind of bolster the value of that crypto. And that could be done in any number of ways. It's hard to tell what causes some to take off and what causes some to tank in value. And that was with the one where the creator was surprised that he really didn't expect that this would ever take off, but for some reason, due to circumstances he probably didn't foresee, it actually did gain traction.
I just want to jump in because I think Commissioner Baker is absolutely right, and I appreciate her pointing that out and having you explain that. Mr. Norton, my understanding of option 3 is that is why in option 3, staff has proposed this idea of requiring a conversion. The cryptocurrencies wishes to be given to the campaign because you avoid that precise issue that Commissioner Baker has just raised about speculating or trying to use insider information. Right? Yes,
and I think there's multiple reasons to require this conversion. It can be done instantaneously. So I think, that is consistent with the one bank account rule, and we won't have, the committee isn't maintaining a wallet where the crypto has to sit around for some period of time. And I think there's also certain benefits for accounting purposes. With now the 19,000 plus cryptocurrencies out there, it's ostensible that campaigns could end up receiving contributions in dozens of different cryptos. With the payment processor and cash out option, it's all US dollars going into their bank account. And that was an issue raised by Controller Betty Yee concerning a piece of pending legislation. There's a Senate bill that would allow cryptocurrency as payment for government services, and that was her concern, was that, well, this would make accounting very difficult because these agencies would then ostensibly maintain accounts of all sorts of different cryptos, and there aren't really accepted accounting measures for reconciling that, and then there's the volatility there. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, if I may, for making that point, because that's basically where I was going, is why in the options are we not treating, is there not a proposal to treat it just like we would an asset that is given to a campaign like a stock asset? And I think that's one of the critical reasons. So like the chair, I'm leaning towards option 3. I think option 1, where we continue the prohibition, is no longer appropriate for California or for the Times and for the ability to honor speech and the way that contributors want to make it. But option 3 has the benefits of, to me, much more information and protective protocols. And it kind of harnesses how, in a very, 2 business days, harnesses how long that crypto will be held before it goes. And so thank you for that information.
And just to add that for option 2, we could also require the use of a payment processor. And that's why I was kind of pointing out that this was a process that was somewhat in flux. And I think Commissioner Wood did raise a question beforehand about why it was done this way. We just sort of proposed it that way, but we could certainly require the use of a payment processor if the Commission were interested in going the option 2 route. And I think that, given the volatility, not allowing the committees to hold cryptocurrency for any length of time is probably the better way to go.
Mr. Wilson? Yes, I appreciate the presentation, Mr. Norton, and the comments made by the other commissioners. From my perspective, by process of elimination, option 3 is kind of the only option that I see that's feasible. You clarified that there are 19,552 and counting cryptocurrency processors. Do we have any idea how many of those are in the United States, just roughly? Or?
Oh, and just to make it, those are the number of cryptocurrencies. Yes, there's about 523 different exchanges, I believe, as of last check, and not all of them are located in the United States. Some of them, I've actually contacted some of them. There's some that have a U.S. presence. They seem to hold themselves out as being relatively international. None of them have a phone number. You could communicate by email and they'll get back to you. So there are some based here. There are many that are based overseas as well. So that does present a potential challenge in terms of if we allow it and if an investigation needs to then issue subpoenas to see what Know Your Customer protocol has been complied with. Now they seem to be at least holding themselves out as being agreeable to work with investigators. They have emails, sort of general information, and they also have emails where subpoenas may be directed if there's an investigation. But as I've pointed out too, there are some platforms that have just decided not to do business with U.S.-based consumers because they don't want to comply with these requirements.
Okay, so the 500 plus processors, they're managing the 19,000 plus different cryptocurrencies. Is that correct, pretty much?
Yeah, that's correct. And just to point out, we are requiring we're proposing the requirement of the processor because it can also be traded peer-to-peer electronically, which kind of, I think that's the digital version of, if I took money out of my wallet and I handed it to someone, I'm making a payment, but in that instance, there's no third party involved, and there's sort of the electronic version of that, where if you have the key, you can transfer money directly to another cryptocurrency user's wallet without any third party verification. So it's typically the cash out process that requires the use of the crypto exchange, because if someone has $1 million in cryptocurrency and they want to cash it out, they're going to have to go to an exchange to do that.
I hope I'm not here to see the day when you can pay a Fppc fine with cryptocurrency. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilson. Commissioner Wood.
Thank you all for your great questions in this conversation. in the course of it, I heard Mr. Norton say, I just broke my pen, sorry. In the course of it, I heard Mr. Norton say that the conversion can happen instantaneously. So now my question becomes, what's so special about 48 hours? Why don't we just require it to happen instantaneously? And then we avoid Commissioner Baker's concerns about a famous person or a powerful person giving money and then saying some stuff that would inflate that currency so then they could cash it out.
And that is a very good suggestion. There's no reason we couldn't. It's all open for discussion. As I originally drafted these, I had included the 48-hour requirement in both options 2 and 3 until I realized that there is the option of a payment processor, which offered instantaneous conversion so that it never kind of sits in limbo. It's converted right at that moment and the money is transferred directly. So I think if there were interest in option 2, I would recommend a similar requirement that conversion be instantaneous. But looking at it initially, I just wasn't aware that time frame could be so specific that there was never an opportunity to manipulate the value of the cryptocurrency.
I gotcha. So if I went on vacation in Mexico and came back with $100 worth of pesos and somebody was running for office and I wanted to give, I wanted to make that donation, would we require them to convert that immediately? Like what happens with actual fiat currency in that situation?
Well, with fiat currency, I suppose if it's U.S. fiat currency, it doesn't have to be converted immediately. The issue with pesos is interesting. I can't say that we've addressed that issue in the past.
Cambridge?
I mean, I don't mean it as a gotcha question. I was just reaching for an analogy,
Yeah.
Professor hypotheticals.
It is.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the statute doesn't address that or our regulations, and I don't remember ever seeing any sort of advice on that issue. Obviously, it would have to be less than the value of it would have to be less than $100, I would think. But we haven't gotten that letter yet.
Well,
and I assume there'd be the miscellaneous increase to cash if it's valued at $99 in pesos at the time of receipt, and if upon cash out it's worth anything above that, it would be a miscellaneous increase to cash.
I gotcha. Well, I think, since we can't really say no on environmental grounds, I think I also support option 3. I just think it would be cleaner if there's no reason not to do it, to just require the instantaneous conversion. Because I think that avoids some, challenges some potential challenges on the enforcement side with conflicts of interest and monkeying around with the value of it and things like that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well, Commissioner Wood is the expert in this particular area as it comes to some of these issues, but I think she raised a question that perhaps one of the senior counsel or general counsel Bainbridge could answer. What if you had a situation where someone lived, let's say, in another country, and they made a donation or contribution to a candidate, let's say in California? How is that? Anyone have any idea how that contribution would be processed? Let's say someone in Italy decides, I'm going to give $1,000 to a candidate for office. How is that reported? I have no idea. It's more of a general question.
Can I ask, as part of your hypothetical, are you assuming it's like a California resident who's just?
It doesn't matter. It could be someone. It could be someone who lives in a foreign country and decides, I'm going to contribute to X candidate in California for Congress, for well, it wouldn't apply here, but to us. But let's say for the state senate, someone decides I want to make a contribution. Can they do that?
No.
Oh, they can't.
Okay.
That answers my question.
And they would have to be domiciled in the United States.
Okay.
And that's the issue that if I'm domiciled in the United States but on vacation, I could do it. But if I'm not, and you're suggesting someone who's an Italian citizen who lives in Italy, would not be eligible.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just learned something.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a question for you. We spent some time, Commissioner Wood raised the issue of the timing, and just want to make sure we're all talking about the exact same thing, because when I look at option 3, and maybe I'm reading it too closely, as I understand it, I have I would like to use, make a contribution. I go to the exchange. The exchange is going to, under option 3, instantaneously convert it.
Yes.
So as soon as I hand them I transfer them my crypto coin, it becomes the equivalent of U.S. value at that point, U.S. currency value at that point. The 2 days is the 2 days that it takes to transfer that money to the committee. Is that right?
That is correct, yes. And I'm sorry if that wasn't as clear, but that is my intent there, to show that this processor essentially locks in the payment then and there, and they have some leeway in actually moving the money. So if, kind of like the receipt of the check, if the committee receives the check, they know they have the money, it hasn't hit the account yet, it's just going to take them some time to process it. But this is the same idea, that it's instantaneous, and we would also want to require, if the commission chooses to move forward, that there be a requirement that notice be provided to the committee that in fact the money has been received, in case there's 24-hour reporting. So even if the reconciliation might not occur instantaneously, they know right then and there, this contribution just came in cryptocurrency, here's the information. And it is my understanding, I talked to Liz Benetti, one of our auditors, and she says that from what she's seen, that is how it works with credit card contributions, some of these other services, that the committee knows right then and there that the contribution has been made, even if it might take a little bit of time for the balance to show up in the committee's account.
Right, and I think sort of the analogy that at least comes to my mind is something like Act Blue.
Yes.
Right? Like if somebody were to contribute to Act Blue, the value of that contribution is what it is instantaneously when you send your money to Act Blue. But
Correct.
Act Blue has a little bit of leeway in then transmitting it, forwarding that to the campaign, is my understanding.
That's correct.
Okay. So I would say then, if the commission ultimately directs staff to proceed with option 3, which it sounds like we may be coming to consensus on, I do think that the language should be a little bit clearer, because I kind of just intuited that that's what you meant, but I think you could say it must be immediately converted by the payment processor. That part is clear, so we've locked in the cash value at the time the transaction occurs. I'm fine with giving the exchange some time period to then transfer it to the committee, so long as the value is locked in at the time the transaction is paid between the contributor and the of my colleagues, the group.
I think with your, excuse me, the last part of your statement, you clarified where I was, is under option 3, the way it's portrayed, and we may be coalescing around, the value of the crypto is inked when the contribution is made from the donor to the recipient committee or candidate. That 2-day period is just for the processor, but it's inked. Okay, so there's like a time within that happens. So I have a question unrelated to that. If there's any further conversation about that, I don't want to drive us away from it, but is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
So there are some people who do not have limits on how much that can be contributed to the campaign. That's the candidate. The candidate can give, if I'm correct, and I hope I am, an unlimited amount. They can cut a check to their campaign right now without limit. Now they have to give the money to the campaign in the one, it can't be like I go spend it and I'm going to get reimbursement from the campaign. We don't do that here in California. But I think we need to be thinking of how this plays out for those, how we are going to treat crypto with people who don't have a contribution limit, or it's different, like a political party or a central committee giving to a candidate. I just want to make sure that's already part of this. And Mr. Norton, have you thought, I'm sure you've thought about everything. Have you thought that through, or what do you think about that?
And
Under option
I
3
have
in
thought,
particular.
yes, I have thought about that, because yes, political party committees, you have some where there's no limits, and you also have some locals where the limits are as low as $250. So I think that's something we could sort of tailor, that it put that duty on the committee, that then if a committee chooses to allow cryptocurrency contributions, that they work with the processor to specify. And I think technologically that's possible. If you're running in a jurisdiction that has a $250 limit, you could have the sort of that processor page set up to make sure that whatever crypto you're choosing, the contribution would not exceed $250 and violate the limit, so that someone couldn't give more than the limit. But conversely, if there's a party committee or ballot measure committee with no limits, they could set it up that way so that there would be no limits on the contribution.
I know for my part, I'm going to continue thinking about that one, because I'll have to be asking myself as we continue this conversation, if there's something about crypto that would make it appropriate to put a contribution limit where we otherwise don't have it. And I don't know that we're going to solve that today, but I know going forward, I'm going to be thinking about that. And I welcome your considerations or recommendations on it as well. Thank
you. Commissioner Wood?
This is just a question that might betray some ignorance, but don't party committees have some kind of limit on what they can receive? And also, if party committees are receiving Bitcoin, they would be subject to this too. So that would be converted into dollars. So I think it's just the candidates funding their own campaigns that we're concerned about, right?
Well, but even Mr. Norton, certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but as I read option 3, even if I am the candidate and I wish to contribute to my own campaign, I would still need to adhere to the process in option 3. If I held cryptocurrency and I wanted to realize the value of that for the benefit of my campaign. Right?
Yes, that's correct. And I think that's true. We sometimes see that in enforcement with candidates that are funding their own campaign. It's not okay I'm spending my own money, so I use a different account. It all has to be run through the proper account and documented. I think this is the same general concept here, is that all the expenditures have to be run through the single designated campaign bank account. And in this case, all of the cryptocurrency contributions would need to be run through this designated processor that follows the parameters of the regulation.
Commissioner Wood, though, did ask a different question, which is the restrictions or limits for party committees.
Cut out.
I think we could tailor the.
Commissioner Wood, you had a question about, I think you were asking a question about generally what are the limits on party committees, is that right?
I mean, I was thinking that the party committees weren't going to be a concern, because they would be subject to this also. So they would have one account with cash, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I mean, one account with dollars, I'm sorry. So that any Bitcoin that came into them, the only way they're going to have Bitcoin is if they buy it or if they receive it, but they're not going to be receiving it because they'll have to convert it also, right? So are we allowing them to buy it? I don't know.
Yeah, that's not covered by this regulation. And Commissioner Wood is right. The restrictions on the party committees is the money coming into them. So you're limited in how much you can give to a party committee if it's designated to go to candidates. So regardless, and under option 2 and option 3, we're essentially requiring the money to be converted before it goes to the committee. So in any case, you can look at it the same as what it would be under a normal contribution in terms of applying it to the different types of committees and for the different types of contributions.
Any additional commissioner questions or comments for Wood?
All right, now my last question made me wonder, we would allow a committee, I mean, we wouldn't have any opinion on whether a committee decided to buy some stock, right? And so can they buy crypto as an investment?
Well, that's not something we've addressed here, but we certainly could include express prohibition on that if that's.
I mean, I don't know if we care, but it just, since we're talking about crypto, sorry, Chair.
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent question. I think my question would be, I think what you're suggesting is that we would restrict these ability to purchase cryptocurrency in some way, potentially, I think is what your question is. And I think, you know,
well, I mean, that's my question, but it's born of the idea that I don't think we're letting them make expenditures in Bitcoin or in crypto. And so the only reason that they would buy crypto is to invest, to then later convert it into cash so they could have more cash to put into that same account to then spend, because we're not really allowing them to do any crypto transactions on the expenditure side. Right now, we're just talking about how they're going to receive that money, and it would be just in dollars, right? So that's why I was asking about buying it just as an investment. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And so my threshold question, I guess I have a couple questions, but one, is that prohibited today? Because the ban only applies to contributions. It doesn't apply to purchasing, but you tell me.
Yeah, I don't think that was contemplated in the original ban, and it doesn't involve the same concerns that if a committee is purchasing an investment, I know they can purchase a CD, or there's no question on the origin of those funds. I think it's just the question there is whether or not it's a good idea as an investment, but not the traceability of who's making the contributions.
Right, and so the answer is today, under existing rules, nothing prohibits purchasing cryptocurrency as for investment purposes, et cetera, as long as it falls within the rules for proper campaign expenditure.
Yes.
Okay, so then the second question, I think, is would it require a statutory change in order to accomplish, if one wanted to pursue that as a policy? I'm not suggesting we do or we don't, but if you wanted to, wouldn't that require a statutory change? Or I don't know, Mr. Bainbridge, maybe you want to. That strikes me as the type of thing that we need to amend.
Yeah, I'm of a similar opinion, but we can look at that since this is just pre-notice if we want to research a little bit more the issue of expenditures via cryptocurrency or purchasing them as investments. I think there's nothing that would prohibit purchasing them as investments. If you start talking about spending cryptocurrency by committee, then you can run into one bank account issues. And I would say under current law, probably couldn't do that because the money has to run through the campaign bank account, at least as to candidates.
Yeah, that's my sense too. So I think the question really is the first one that you were answering. Could we just off the table as something?
Yeah, my sense is I can't think of a statute we would point to say that we have that authority at this point. But again, these are laws that were first written in 1974, and we're talking about cryptocurrency. So it's, you know, a lot of it's not covered by what's in the law right now.
Always appreciate you indulging me when I put you on the spot like that.
Just use lots of qualifying language. That's what I do.
Good. Yes, Commissioner Wilson.
Yes, you know, thank you, Mr. Bainbridge, for your response, and you know, the chair was right on point in terms of, you know, asking that question. Will we get some feedback at the next commission meeting on the question that you posed? That would be, I think, helpful.
Not the next one, but the one after that. So when we bring it back, we can bring it back with information about.
Okay, thank you.
And the specific question is investing, committee investing in cryptocurrency, right? That's what we want to see if there's anything instructive.
Yeah, I would probably, not to mince words, but we're all lawyers, right? So it's, I would just say, can they purchase cryptocurrency? Who knows what the most likely one is investing, but who knows, right? Can they purchase cryptocurrency? All right, any other commissioner questions or comments for Mr. Norton before I open it up to public comment? None. Do we have any public comment on item 6, our pre-notice discussion of cryptocurrency? Hearing and seeing none. Although I do note that we have one digital public comment from Alan Wilson, who is registering his opposition to the use of cryptocurrency for campaign contributions. Appreciate your comment, Mr. Wilson.
Did he say why, Mr. Chair? I'm sorry.
He wrote, cryptocurrency is highly speculative market, which is vastly different from cash and check that is normally used in transactions. Fppc should be leery of the push by the cryptocurrency.
Thank you.
So I think we have, through our discussion, I think we have expressed similar concerns about the potential misuse of cryptocurrency, which is why I think staff spent so much time trying to craft a regulatory option that would address those to the. So at this point, I would make a motion that we direct staff to pursue option 3, the concept stated in option 3, as a regulatory option for the commission to consider adoption of in July. I think with respect to when you start putting your pen to paper on option 3, we heard some things from the commission today, our concerns about which exchanges would be eligible to do these types of transactions. I think some commissioners expressed a preference for US-based exchanges, and so I think staff should pay attention to that in crafting this, as well as what specifically the requirements are for the Know Your Customer protocols. I think, Mr. Norton, this I was thinking of is you mentioned some of them, I believe, require to actually show an ID. If there's some way that the regulation could make it clear that only those types of exchanges that have a robust identification process would be eligible, I think that's something that I should consider crafting into the regulation.
Yes, that's something that we've looked at, and I think we would make sure that there are robust requirements.
I have a second on my motion.
Second.
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Commissioner Wood?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Norton. Again, I know we all said it, but it bears repeating. Excellent job on this memo. Thank you for becoming the in-house cryptocurrency expert for us. Saved us many, many hours of research time.
Thank you.
All right. We'll now proceed to item 7 on our agenda. I'll invite to the table our Chief of Administration, Ms. Hahn, to give us a third quarter expenditure report.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioner. I'm here to submit the report as is, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Just a point of clarification. This is the update expenditure report for the current year budget. I read that the governor recently released a revise. When do you think you're going to be able to present to the commission about how our agency is affected by the main?
So usually we would get a signed budget sometime in June, and then I would be able to update the commission in July for the updated May revised number.
Any other commissioner questions or comments for Ms. Hahn on the third quarter expenditure? Public comment on item 7? Thank you, Ms. Hahn. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 8, this is our committee updates. Commissioner Baker and I sat as the Law and Policy Committee, and as we heard from Ms. Nakano earlier in our session, we had a discussion about legislation and provided some feedback on support positions and no positions on other bills. We're going to have another meeting soon where we'll continue to work with the Ms. Baker, or Commissioner Baker, sorry. Do you have any further comments?
I do not. Thank you for that very good update on law and policy. I am going to do a personal point of privilege. As I mentioned, I will be leaving in a few minutes. Normally I wouldn't leave a meeting early. And since we're just about to transition from one item number to a next, I thought if I miss the opportunity to share a future agenda item, I hope I can take a moment now to insert that if it's okay with my colleagues in the chair.
Yes.
That
in fact,
is.
why don't we go ahead and move to item 11? We'll just take that one up now.
Thank you. I'm grateful for that. The United States Supreme Court recently had an opinion about invalidating limits on what an individual can, their personal funds can use to repay loans they've made to their campaign. This was a matter specifically that Senator Ted Cruz had pursued in litigation, and the Supreme Court ruled on it this week. I would be grateful if it is timely and appropriate, not too much of a stretch for our team to hear. Are there any implications for our matters within our jurisdictions related to that, including any contribution reimbursement limits that we may have on candidates as well as for personal loans? Don't need it right now, but I just wanted to put that on our radar and agenda for future update. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker.
Thank
I think that's a great idea. So perhaps Mr. Bainbridge can an informational presentation of some sort to the Commission on that decision. I have one item, since we're on item 11, for future action, and this came up from item 3. I think Commissioner Wilson also raised it. We heard in item 3 the unusual scenario where a minor was designated as a treasurer. So I would like a future item, Mr. Bainbridge, if you would, advising us, one, on whether the Act does permit a minor to serve as a treasurer. And if it does, then I think I would like to understand what our options are for earlier from Ayrton. Any of the commissioners wish to identify future agenda items? Right. Get back. We've already done item 9 with earlier with Ms. Nakano. So we are now on item 10. These are our executive staff reports, and we'll begin with Chief Brereton, Enforcement Division.
Hello again.
Welcome back.
The only thing I'd like to point out in this month's Enforcement Division report is that we updated the quarterly summary to 2022. So we now have the first quarter of 2022 for the prior year's workload. And it does show, steady progress on our older cases, and we will continue to update that quarterly throughout the year. So you'll see it again in August to show the July numbers.
Excellent. Just to clarify, so this truly is a chart, and I'm looking for the prior year's workload. So this does not, I just don't want anybody to be confused. This doesn't include all of the new referrals and cases, et cetera, that are.
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions or comments for Chief Brereton? Chief Brereton, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now proceed with our Audits and Assistant Division report. Chief Shaw.
Hello, Chair and Commissioners.
Good morning.
My report is as submitted. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Questions or comments for Chief Shaw? Thank you very much for your report. Great job.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is our Legal Division. Mr. Bainbridge.
Just wanted to draw everyone's attention on page 10 to letter C with our new and updated educational resources. We put together a new conflicts of interest guide, which was quite an effort. Matt Christie, Kevin Cornwall, and Brian Lau all worked on it. It's a comprehensive overview of conflicts that we've tried to make approachable as conflicts of interest can be. And we kept it to 20 pages, so I think that's about as good as we can do to meet both of those goals. So I'd encourage people to take a look at that. I think it turned out really good, and I think it's very helpful to understanding conflicts. We also have got a local contribution limit webpage up, so that's a sort of comprehensive page to go over the local contribution limits. To refresh everyone's memory, we had legislation passed a couple years ago that required local jurisdictions to either adopt their own limit or comply with a state limit. So that page has information about that and how the rules are different, whether a jurisdiction has adopted their own limits or whether they're following the default limits of the state. And then we also have pull-down menus where you can go and look up a jurisdiction's ordinance if they have one regarding contribution limits. So if people are looking to see if their jurisdiction has contribution limits or just want to do some research on which jurisdictions do, all the ordinances are there on the webpage. And then lastly, we put together a comprehensive fact sheet page. So we had the fact sheets all over the website, but not in one central place with all of them. So our education division put together and located them all in one spot, so you can go there and they're categorized by the topic.
Cambridge.
And then one other thing I'll just add is for potential upcoming regulations, we had the press policy regulation presented last month, so typically it would come back in June. However, in doing that, we realized it's going to affect the same section as the filing officer referral regulation you heard today. So what we're going to do is present those together all in July. It doesn't make sense to amend a reg and then amend it again the next month. So if you were waiting in June with bated breath for the press policy regulation, you're going to have to wait one more month. With that, I have nothing else to add.
Thank you, Mr. Bainbridge. Commissioner Wilson.
While I was waiting for that update, I can delay for a month or two. Thank you. But I just want to commend, Mr. Bainbridge and everyone who's been involved in some of the upgrades with regard to IT. That our website is excellent, and as a member of the Public Outreach and Technology Committee, I appreciate all of the work you've done. The website is user friendly. The search functions are very easy to access. So thank you for all the hard work across the board.
Yeah, thank you for that. The education group works quite a bit with the IT group to together they produce the webpage and update the material. So
I actually had one follow-up question on the local contribution. So we can go to, members of the public can go to that web page, they can go to their jurisdiction, they can pull up the local. Right. Are the local jurisdictions sending those to us on a regular basis? Because I'm just thinking they may amend them throughout the year. So what, if any, process exists to ensure that the most up?
Back when the law passed, we begged and pleaded for the local jurisdictions to send us their ordinances, and when they changed them, to try to remember to send them to us. And we try to remind them occasionally. So we try to keep them up to date. A lot of it depends on the jurisdictions letting us know that they've updated or adopted a contribution limit ordinance. So if any of them are listening and you have, please send it along to any Fppc email address you can find, and we'll make sure it gets added.
Thank you, Mr. Bainbridge.
get too technical here, but if they keep the same hyperlink when they update it, they won't have to inform us because information will automatically be updated based on any revisions that they make.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. Very, very good suggestion, Commissioner Wilson. All right. All right. Anything else for Mr. Bainbridge? All right. Great job, Mr. Bainbridge. All right. Moving to our Administration and Technology Division report. Welcome back, Ms. Hahn.
For my admin report, I would like to submit as is, and I'm here to answer any question that you may have.
All right. Thank you. The only thing I would point out is I was very pleased to see that only 2 people in the whole state didn't file their Form 700 on time.
Well, that's the 87-200 filer. We haven't put in the general.
Yes, I was about to give that qualification, but there's still a lot of people who are complying with the law, and it's important. And
it is actually, we have 99% plus, because looking at the population, it's over 1,000. So you only have 2 out of the 1,000. That's a very good number. And so I want to do a shout out to my SCI unit staff. They've done a very good job this year to ensure filings are on time.
Yeah. Congratulations to your staff and great work. And last but not least, Executive Director West.
Hello. I like to have guest speakers, so I asked Jay Wyringa to come up.
All right. Morning. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Wyringa.
Good morning, good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Jay Wyringa, Communications Director. Just a brief update. If you recall, 2 years ago, we created a sort of evergreen public safety, public service announcement, about 15 seconds in length in both English and Spanish. So we just resumed running that again, and at the end of that PSA, it links to our 2022 election information page. So we began running this again on Google and I believe Facebook a couple of weeks ago. Later today or tomorrow, we will begin running it in limited capacity with one of our vendors, mainly covering Northern California, the Central Valley, and the Central Coast. And that vendor and another vendor, we will begin running that in earnest in late summer and fall for the general election. We do have some limited analytics so far from April 27th to today. From Google, we have 28,000 impressions so far on Google with 12,000 views from April 27th to today. And just anecdotally, it shows most people view it on their mobile phone, and ironically, most people view it in the afternoon and the evening. And we have more male viewers than female viewers so far at this point. But we will continue to provide updates. We'll have what the primary season shows for next commission meeting, and then I'll provide updates again through the fall.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Wyringa.
And then I just had one other thing to add. I wanted to give a shout out to Oakland. The City of Oakland Public Ethics Commission is one of our great partners. They retweet all of our information, and they're just a wonderful partner for us to work with. They are saying goodbye to their executive director, Whitney Barazotto, who's been there for 10 years, and she's going on to bigger, better things. But just wanted to give a shout out to her and thank her for all her great years of service, but to also let everyone know that if you know a good candidate for Oakland for the executive director, that the filing, I think, closes on the 25th, but they're really looking for somebody that's engaged in the process and wants to make a difference. So just want to give that shout out to Whitney, and if you know somebody good, make sure they apply.
Thank you very much, Executive Director West. Any further questions or comments from commissioners? None. Any public comment on item 10? Hearing and seeing none. That is our final item for today. At this time, I go ahead and make a motion to adjourn.
I was going to defer to Commissioner Wood, but I I second the motion.
She needs to save her voice. All right, Ms. Blinker.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Chair Matich.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, thank you, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next month.